Does any of this concern you, along with claims from their family members that many of these people weren't gang members?
You know, there are some big legal questions here. On the one hand, the Bill of Rights applies to everyone, to persons. The Bill of Rights doesn't specifically designate citizens. It's really anyone in the United States the Bill of Rights applies to. On the other hand, the Alien and Enemies Act simply says you really don't get much process. The president can simply declare that you are somehow a problem for foreign policy and opposed to our foreign policy, and you can be deported. So really, ultimately, this goes to the court, and then the court's going to have to decide, are they going to declare unconstitutional a law that's been around for a couple hundred years, or are they going to defer to Congress? If you look at the TikTok decision recently, which I don't agree with, but in the TikTok decision, the court basically said, we're going to defer to Congress. Congress says this is about national security, and who are we to question Congress?
Right, and then the president issued an executive order that defied what Congress did.
Right. But my point is I think the court should have ruled on the First Amendment with regard to TikTok and not said, oh, well, whatever Congress wants. But if you look at the TikTok decision and you had to guess what the Supreme Court's going to do, my guess is they'll uphold the Alien and Enemies Act. It's not necessarily my position, but I think the court will uphold it. So it's at least debatable on both sides who's right or who's wrong here. And I think it's not correct for Democrats to simply say, oh, it's constitutional chaos. There's no leg to stand on. There actually is legal authority on the one hand that's been around for over 200 years.
But just, we're not talking about partisan politics. We're talking about the courts right now and what the judge said he had questions about, and talks about this being done, essentially in the cover of night. This seems to be an argument the administration wants to have go to the Supreme Court. Are you comfortable with bypassing what you described as, what's guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, a day in court, or at least some verification that some of these people actually are guilty in some way of what they're accused of, which is membership in a gang?
So we have a contradiction. We basically have the Constitution that says everyone, persons in the United States, have due process rights, have the Bill of Rights on their side. But we also have law that has been in power for 200 years saying, oh, well, except for when the president wants to deport people. So these are in conflict. There will have to be some decision making. On the question of whether or not a district judge can make a ruling for the whole country, that's also a very big question. And I suspect as this works its way up to the Supreme Court, when you get to the Supreme Court, I do believe the Supreme Court is going to limit district judges from having nationwide rulings. So I think that's also in the offing. But these are huge legal questions, and the only way they begin is by a challenge. If the president doesn't challenge these, they never have standing and never get to court. So on the one hand, the president is generating this, but it's the only way to generate a final conclusion from the court.
It just sounds, these are debates for law professors, certainly. But in the meantime, there are individuals who may have been sent wrongly to these facilities that are outside the U.S. jurisdiction. Are you comfortable, as the man with oversight, as chair of the committee, with what's being done?
I think the courts will rule that there has to be some process. I don't think you are going to be able to deport people.
You're comfortable with it?
So no, I don't think you're answering for me. I think there is going to be some process afforded by the courts for representation before you're deported in most cases. I don't know about the ones under the Alien and Enemies Act, and I'm not sure anybody knows that. And while I love constitutional law, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, I do think it goes to the Supreme Court, and there are arguments to be made on both sides of this question.
Got it. I want to ask you about some congressional business.